Aleksandr Kuznetsov, the head of key projects at Rostelecom, Solar Telecom, is going to talk about security enrichments and the fact that not all of them are equally useful. A very good morning to you, dear friends, dear colleagues. I am happy that you have found the time to join us on this Monday morning. We are going to talk about incident enrichment as an important element of our security procedures, and I do hope that my report is going to be useful and interesting at the same time. So, we are going to talk about what enrichments are, why we would need them, and the qualities of this process and things that are related, but not too much to this thing. Now, if we consider this notion of incident enrichment, we will discover that it is primarily defined by the vendors of various automation products. Even the state standard recently published does not really cover this definition properly. That's why we have defined, or we provide our own definition, that incident enrichment is a process wherein we add additional information to enrich our understanding of an incident. So this is the definition I'm going to apply from this moment on. The closest example I can provide will come from the world of IP addresses. Imagine that you have an IP address in an incident card. However, the incident itself will not tell us much. It can only tell us, for example, which subnet it belongs to, and the level of criticality of the network, where it is located. Well, I guess that a viewer may say, well, it is so much like TI. You may be misleading us here. And it may sound like it is connected to threat intelligence, but I guess this is the most vivid example possible. And I am going to show a bit later how it is all connected, if it is, to TI. So in practice, enrichment is approached somewhat differently. In most cases, people say, well, how about we enter into the incident card all the data that we have. Let's just add everything, and later we'll see what matters and what doesn't. Or how about we just type in copy all the fields from Kaspersky Security Center. Or let's enter at least some data. In our practice, we have developed the following sequence, which we usually apply to enrichment tasks. We ask ourselves the following 4 questions: why, what, where, and how. And I am going to explore all of them in detail now. So if we ask ourselves why we want to enrich stuff, well, in fact, there are 2 main cases where it may be useful. One is when we need to correctly prioritize a certain incident, and then, route the notification. Another why is to ensure that we react properly. Well, the team that is going to perform the incident response would certainly benefit from having additional information and, well, knowing which page in the playbook to turn to. Now the what part, and this part I've broken down into three main parts. One is contextual data, that is the time and place of the incident, a particular set of environmental conditions. Second chapter here is additional details such as process names, file names, names of information systems, things that enable us to have a better understanding of what is happening. And the third group includes additional data or reference data such as contact details of, say, the process owner, or whether an incident like this has ever happened before, such as, retrospective data that may come useful. When we understand when and what for we would need this data, we'll look at where it can be found, which particular system we should go to in order to locate this data. According to our statistics, the leader or the leading system in terms of usefulness for enrichment is Kaspersky Security Center. Surprise, surprise. Because in most cases, it has pretty wide coverage of the infrastructure. It contains quite a lot of information, and this information is well maintained. And this is, following it, I will mention IP address management system, Active Directory services, TAP, EDR, and so on. And I'm going to explore all this in the following cases and scenarios. You may have noticed that CMDB is not shown here, although it may sound like this is the place for CMDB to surface. Unfortunately, our practice has shown that CMDB systems in most cases will contain either outdated information or this information is maintained in a peculiar, incomplete manner. It is primarily targeted to be of use for IT, not InfoSec people. At least this is our statistics. Maybe, actually, I do hope that the situation is not that dire where you are. And the fourth element here is how and when. Because you can collect this information as per schedule or on demand, and you can collect all of it or you can collect it partially. So I'm going to talk you through the potential or through all the details here. Well, since it's a technical conference, as technocrats, obviously we want to know where technically we want to implement this enrichment. There are, in fact, lots of possible cases, but I'm looking here at four primary ones, and I'll also try to emphasize their strengths and weaknesses. Actually, the first most probable scenario here, so to speak, would be a CM system. Well, the leaders in this market have incident enrichment provided as out-of-the-box function, which means that you don't need too many interfaces as an operator. There are disadvantages here as well. One of them is that incident enrichment will be very much limited by the CM system itself. And it will be emphasizing InfoSec incidents on the basis of logs. Please note that it will create substantial load memory-wise and CPU-wise because these activities are quite resource-heavy. The advantage is that if we are using incidents in the CM system on the basis of InfoSec events, incidents arising from other channels may fail to appear in CM systems. There are some enthusiasts that love to interface systems, and they make sure that all incident messages arrive in CM, but this is not always possible. Another group is IRP, which is now sort of merging with SOAR. And such systems are easy to integrate, easy to interface with various enrichment sources. And you can either work in them or you can export and import data. And as long as we're talking about the second goal here, which is adequate response, IRPs or SOARs can be seamlessly integrated with playbooks. There are, however, limitations and constraints. Surprisingly, few elements will be applicable out of the box, which is similar to coordination rules in CM systems. CM vendors have developed so many correlation rules, and they used to engage in these phallometric exercises, comparing who would have more of this. However, in real life, you need to customize them a lot. Same thing happens on the enrichment front. So you can hardly count on having, the IRP or a SOAR provide all the functionality out of the box right away. It simply doesn't work. Many vendors will expect to be paid for integration modules, for interfaces to external systems, so be prepared for that. Third class of systems that can be used here would be service desk systems. And here, I am referring to the service desks that are already available in your organization. And why is this the case? Well, because the process for managing IT incidents must have already been developed and deployed in your service desk. So the key advantage here is that the platform itself is already well known to IT people or InfoSec people. The disadvantages of service desk, in terms of integration, for example, also do exist. Well, actually, they were designed to serve a different purpose, so your enrichment capabilities may be limited. And if you are developing enrichment capabilities inside service desk, but the existing workflows have been designed to serve other IT or InfoSec needs, that may be the biggest issue, because people usually are averse to the idea of meddling with a business process or workflow that already exists. So this kind of change would obviously impact your release cycle. It may impact a business logic that has been around for years, which means that you either have to adapt the enrichment process you propose, or you need to agree with your colleagues on a step-by-step evolution of the incumbent workflow. And there is one more opportunity, something that is actually used primarily by smaller companies or companies that are just starting their journey, involves your classical Excel spreadsheets. Well, the biggest advantage is that everybody has it. It is pretty simple. Actually, people often don't know of its integration capabilities, which it does have. There are obviously some limitations. It will not support certain files or file structures, and in fact, the size or the volume of information Excel can support is limited. The total number of strings it can support is shown here. However, for a small organization, it may well be what you need to start, because that way you will be able to learn what your desired process should be, and then you will be able to design the right specs for the future system. I would love to discuss here different options of data collection. Now, obviously, much will depend on the source of data. It can be, for example, a database. And if it's a database, chances are you will be using SQL queries. Most systems today will support API queries. However, we know from practice that if you see in a system interface a certain set of data, this does not mean you're going to get the same data set via the API. This is, I guess, the key disillusionment or constraint of APIs. APIs tend to constrain things very much. Moreover, many systems currently being used in the world seem to be somewhat limited. Moreover, APIs tend to be very customized. So, for example, if you're using a CM system or an IRP system where you want to automate the enrichment process, and you may be reading, say, the usual vendor manuals for APIs, you will be surprised that the API as deployed can be quite different. Moreover, system interfaces will often have different visualizations. The stuff that is easy to read visually, take for example IPAM. Well, IPAM will show you a certain hierarchy of IP addresses, but obviously the same information will be stored in the database in a very different manner, and you will need to query parental subnets and then reconstruct the hierarchical relations between them, and then try to, well, visualize it properly. Although IPAM would give you such a beautiful visual representation. Now, as regards the mode of information collection, obviously there are two ways you can do it. You can sort of vacuum clean, that is, import everything en masse on a regular basis, like every week. And obviously, you can do pinpoint queries. For example, you found an IP address which is weird, you request data from IPAM. What are the advantages and disadvantages? Well, obviously, if you do it on a regular basis, you can use some technological window, quote unquote, some period of low usage of the system to request this data. And this will be great for data sources like IPAM, because new nets and subnets don't pop up every day. But for systems like KSC or Active Directory, that's a bad idea, because a new machine or a new AV agent, they will be popping up in your system quite often, several times a day, usually. So consider ways of making your queries efficient, because you can exert negative impact on the target system. Because nobody likes it when information security people trying to do their job properly create havoc in the systems they're designed to protect. Okay, next question is, what do we use to enrich the data on incidents? Naturally, much will depend here on the particular situations or particular context. We will be interested in the sources of activity, or shall we call it the target of the attack. We're talking here about data on users, devices, software, patches, processes, artifacts, and networks. Obviously, you can continue the list, but this pretty much covers the main elements. Another big module here will include data on risks, threats, and vulnerabilities. It is not just a jumble of terms, by the way. Much really depends on the kind of terminology a particular company uses, because some companies think in risks while others think in threats. So indeed, there will be different classification systems. Some people will be thinking about, say, critical business risks, or they will be using, say, the kill chain methodology. So the kind of approach or the kind of mentality you have will pretty much define your sequence of actions. Is it like the last hop towards the target system? Or are there some initial scans and half-hearted attempts to do at least something? Next unit here is business data, priorities, impact, and the kind of business systems that are involved. For example, If it's, say, a test segment and a backup copy, it's one thing. Like, it's important. You still need to investigate it, but it can wait. But if we are talking about internet banking system, remote banking system, or say an order processing system, which, if compromised, can actually wreak havoc in your operations, obviously you need to respond very fast. Finally, we have contact data. That is, contact data for the people we need to interact with in order to respond or verify or confirm. Usually it's a bunch of emails and phone details, but also it will include the escalation rules. Well, this one gives you just a visual for the logical flow, so to speak, this logical schematic for what needs to be done. For example, if we see a login, we can access the AD, request additional information on the user, and if we have, say, an IP address or a domain name, we'll talk to IPAM or a KSC, because these systems, by the way, are connected to each other. So this is how enrichment starts. Importantly, we need to remember the balance between too much and too little additional data. Quite often, when people realize they can get information, they become really greedy and they try to stuff all the information they can get their hands on into the system, which is no good, because you can easily have the operator snowed under useless information. Try to hit the golden mean here. You can collect, but then sort of hide the information that is available but not really required. Here is an example of what I'm referring to. Actually, I guess some of you may recognize the system. So on the left, in the left-hand part of the screenshot, you can see the incoming card. It contains a number of fields, and there is an IP address there, and we do see a Trojan there, and we have the IP address. Then, thanks to the integration pre-configured, we connect to IPAM in order to identify which subnet it is, and it's a production subnetwork. Also, we query KSC in order to get information about the particular owner of this subnetwork, and we can get in touch with him. And we also have the additional data field here. We can request data on how this machine is doing, and it will turn out, for example, that AV is struggling there. There are some statuses there that need to be addressed. So this slide shows how data can be usefully enriched by adding context, by adding contact details. And by the way, if you recognize any names, this is pure coincidence. You shouldn't really look for any particular organization here. Now, let's turn to a question which may seem to be unrelated to the process of enrichment, while in fact it is directly connected. I am referring to the quality of input data. Well, you do remember the classical GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. It is perfectly true for the world of enrichment. If the data you're using is incomplete, inconsistent, or out of date, well, your incident card will be populated with the same shit, and your operator will have to act based on it. For example, you may have a very well-structured information, but the data may be like 3 years old. This is what happens quite often when, they introduce a system, they populate a system with data, but then they forget to maintain it. Dynamic data will be a particular challenge. Naturally, with remote work, it is becoming increasingly more challenging when people are working from home and changing devices they're using. So priorities previously could be easily set up in a non-dynamic manner, which means that they won't work, they won't apply anymore. So you may see, say, dynamic IP addresses where everybody should have different IP addresses and all of them have like 192 and, well, the ending with zeros and ones and twos. And if you have to make your decisions based on these IPs and this does not match what your IPAM says, shouldn't be surprised. Also note diverse data formats. This may constrain your ability to construe the information coming in. Quite often, in integration, we take data as is. If it is some special format, or there are some additional, say, encodings or encryptions, you will see some data in CM, which will be difficult for the operator to process. So very often what you have shown in the field is something like the machine that Vasy is using, or Vasily. What does it mean? Or admin, admin, admin. Or last name, last name. It is incredibly difficult to use such information. So the key thing here is when you start dealing with enrichment, you will need to go outside your usual perimeter, quote unquote, to double check the quality of the input data. So to summarize my speech, I would like to point out that incident enrichment should help you first and foremost address two objectives. One is proper prioritization. That is, it will help you identify the impact or the influence it may have on business. In fact, it is very useful in terms of, for example, of incident escalation. Secondly, enrichment should help you properly respond to incidents. Well, because your team will know what has happened on the same machine previously, what can be done and what should never be done. As regards the perfect location for enrichment, my answer is very simple. Use the system you find most convenient. If you don't have anything, you can start your experiments with Excel, but target a specially designed system such as IRP or SOAR, because in terms of integration, in terms of visualization, in terms of coordination of your future responses, they are the best thing you can get. Also, please remember that the quality of input data will determine the quality of your response. If these are your first steps in incident data enrichment, double-check the quality of your input data. Chances are you will be the person that will initiate corporate journey towards data quality improvement. Practice has shown it takes not days, not weeks, sometimes it takes months or years. And very often it becomes a continuous process. It is in your interest to start improving data quality as soon as possible. Thank you very much for your attention. I will be happy to take your questions, if any. Thank you very much, Aleksandr, for your report. Can you please describe an approach where incident enrichment happens timely and efficiently? Yes, sure. If you want it timely and efficient, it means you need to have automation, which means you're using either CM or IRP, because that way incident cards will be automatically populated with the required data. This is what will make the process timely and efficient. All other tools will require either manual involvement or a time lag? Thank you very much, both for your answer and for your report.